going to get going. Let me do some super quick house cleaning or housekeeping. Nicaragua was epic. I'm not going to go into that. We had a professional photographer with us, so we will have plenty of photos and videos and other stuff to share. But it was just an absolutely incredible experience. It's hard to describe. On the 6th, so in 2 days, April Sprints joins us as one of our top advisors. So she has her office hours. On the 11th, we have a Legend Series with Jen Drummond. Jen is a world record holder in mountain climbing and a phenomenal keynote speaker. On the 13th, we have a meetup in Charlotte, North Carolina. And on the 29th, we have a meetup in New York City to help support Peter Shaler and Jason Forehand. They are setting up a transformation kitchen in Nicaragua, and we're doing a fundraiser there in New York. Chris Shembra is giving a keynote, so super excited about that. For anyone who's new to this format, it's a 30-30 format, meaning Chad and I are going to chop it up for about 30 minutes like fireside chat, and then we're going to open it up for live Q&A, and you can ask whatever you'd like to Chad. So if you've got a question for Chad, just drop in the chat, hey, I've got a question. You don't have to write it out. Kathy will let me know, and I'll tee you up, and you can ask the question directly to Chad. But Chad is one of those guys that, you know, I could go a couple months with no communication, but when we do, I feel like he's my best buddy. He's just one of those guys that always makes you feel great about yourself. He has built a multi-million-dollar business called Cannonball Moments. He wrote a USA Today bestseller, Keep Telling Yourself, which we're going to dive into today. He's turned himself into, I'm calling you a serial endurance athlete at this point. Like you turned yourself into that. You are a phenomenal dad to twins, Madison and Mackenzie. You're an incredible husband to Kim. You've got a top podcast in the Cannonball Mindset, where he's had the best of the best on, from Gary Vee to Jesse Itzler to Kara Golden. I even snuck in there somehow. I don't know what was going on that day, but it must have been a slow day at Cannonball. But I even snuck in there at one point.
That was the best episode. All the others are just amateurs. When you get Scott MacGregor on, now you're legit.
I legitimately, I don't think I've ever let my parents listen to a podcast, but we were driving. I was driving them up to my brother who lives in like God's country in Connecticut. And they were in the back seat, and I played your podcast because it was probably my favorite. And they were like, "Wow, okay."
That was a good episode.
They had no idea what I actually did, but they found out. So anyway, Chad, man, I am stoked to have you. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you. And just for housekeeping, my cameras, I'm operating in my house today, which is, I don't think I've ever done. And so the camera's in front of me, but the screen is over here. So if I'm looking over here, like, that's why it's off. So you're like, why is he looking over there? It's because you're actually over here, but the camera is here. And maybe my media guy will fix a little bit of that. So I apologize in advance if I don't seem to be looking at you. No worries
at all. I love the book. The packaging of the book, I gotta say, is epic. I mean, if you're gonna launch a book, you gotta see the package that I got from Chad when he sent me this book. It was, that was like ripped out of the pages of the late great John Ruhlin. Absolutely,
he was the best.
Phenomenal.
Yeah, that's my team, by the way. I have what's crazy. This goes to the power of surrounding yourself with just amazing people, because I'm a visionary by heart, but I am a horrible integrator. So what that means is, like, I can paint the vision. I have no clue how I'm going to get it done. So I go to my team and I'm like, hey, this is what I have the vision for. All right, make it happen. And somehow they for 9 years, they always do on an extraordinary level. And so that's the power of just having amazing people work with you.
And that has been Kathy for me. So when I said, hey, I want to do a magazine, I don't want to do a newsletter. And I'm like, but I have no idea how to do that. And then boom, next thing you know, we have this insane magazine with 30,000 subscribers.
It's unbelievable. Cool. Unbelievable.
All right. So much to talk about. Your book is incredible, but let's go. I want to start with Chad. I'm going to call you, this is Chad 1.0. So this is young Chad. This is probably Chad 0 to late 20s.
Yeah.
So you were far from the Chad Sanschagrin that we know today.
Yeah.
So I don't know, would it be fair to say maybe a little bit of a victim mentality? I mean, you grew up without a dad.
Yeah.
Didn't go to college.
Nope.
And you were a different guy.
Yeah. I was definitely version 1.0. Well, I was definitely version 1.0. It's, everybody has struggles. My struggle was just I had a broken belief system. I wasn't a broken human being. I just had a broken belief system. So my father leaves when we're 5. I have a brother who's 16 months older than me, same situation. I see this situation as a rallying cry for me to get sympathy and be a victim. And so I was Teflon. Nothing ever stuck to me because I was the kid without a father. I was the poor kid. I was the not smart kid. I was the goofy kid that, was when I was in 5th grade, I was already 6 feet tall, or 5'11". So I was goofy, I was lanky, I wasn't intelligent. And so but it was never my fault because I had this built-in excuse system. It wasn't. And so you become addicted to these excuses of why you're not living the life you want to live. And the challenge is the more you tell yourself those type of stories, the more you say these type of things, believe these type of things, then that becomes your truth. And so, when you believe so hardly in the truth, then that's your truth. And so it just gained momentum. I found what I focused on. And for the first 20 years of my life, I wasn't a bad kid. I just had a broken belief system. I didn't get arrested and do crimes. I was never addicted to drugs. I drank way too much. I partied way too much, but I had never read a book until I was 25 years old, not one. I didn't go to college. I barely graduated high school, 1.6 grade point average when I graduated, but it was never my fault. And I was blissfully unaware. I was blissfully, miserably unaware that my life could be different. And so, that's the challenge is you tell yourself these stories and they just pick up steam. And so, now on version 8.0, 10.0 in my life, I realized that it's the same recipe. The same recipe I had to a superhighway. I had a superhighway to victimhood and a dirt road to fulfillment. And now I have a superhighway to fulfillment and a dirt road to victimhood. And so same exact recipe. I just changed the input, changed the stories.
So you named your company Cannonball Moments. Your podcast is Cannonball Mindset.
Yeah.
You talk about cannonball moments. So I'd love for you to describe what is a cannonball moment. And then there's 2 that to me are pretty prominent. There's the story of when you met Kim.
Yep.
And then I think there's the story of you running your first mile when you were 44, 6'8", not exactly like what you think of as a runner.
No, it was like an oak tree moving down the street. It was the weirdest thing. It was not. It's still to this day is not a pretty sight to watch me run.
But now at 51, you've run 50 marathons and you've used it as a vehicle. But let's first of all, what's a cannonball moment? And talk about, I think, that cannonball moment with Kim in the bar, and then what running has done for you and how you've used that as a vehicle.
Yeah. So I believe there are shift moments in your life. Shift stand for see how I find truth. See how I find truth moments. your whole life is predicated on whatever you tell yourself the truth is. And so, I'm living this life of victimhood, and I meet a girl. There's always every great story has a love interest, and so I meet a girl, and I meet her at a bar. Why? Because that's where I spent my entire life. And she was there, and she was actually getting hit on by a friend of mine the whole night. I never actually said a word to her, and he was bombing miserably. It was the greatest thing in the world. Like, I'm just sitting there, and he's like going after her, and he's persistent. He's not giving up, but he's getting nowhere. And at the end of the night, the only things I had said to her all night is, he's not getting anywhere. Can I get you a phone number? And by the grace of God, she gave me her phone number. I don't know why. And I called her immediately. I didn't even wait like the 3-day waiting period. I just all right, I called her the next day, and I said, hey, can I take you out on Friday night? She was home. This was in Baltimore. She was home from college. She was living in Philadelphia at the time, going to school. And we went on a date on Friday night. It's like an 8 o'clock date. And this is a big thing, because when you live your life as sitting on a bar stool, Friday night is that's sacred time. That's the church time for an alcoholic. And so I gave up a Friday night to go on a date with this woman. I get to the restaurant, I meet her, and in the first 5 minutes, I know this is the worst date in the history of my life. The worst date. It was horrible. It was the worst date. It was so bad. I literally asked for the check before the entrees came. And the reason why it was so bad, well, I'll get to that, but it was just a horrible date. So I walk her to the car at 8:45, 8:50 maybe. 50-minute date, start to finish. And I said to her, hey, I'll give you a call. I had a great time. Because I realized this date wasn't going anywhere, and I was giving up that Friday night bar seat time. And I needed to get back downtown because I still had 4 or 5 hours left to meet people, to party, to get drunk. And so I rushed back downtown. I never give it a second thought. I never think about the girl again. Nothing. About 2 months later, I'm in the same bar, and she walks in, and I knew her, but I didn't know where I knew her from. I didn't remember her name. I knew she looked familiar. And so the bar is packed, and she's walking towards me. I think she's walking towards me. She's not really. She's just walking to the bathroom, which I was standing in between her and the bathroom. And she walks up to me, and I'm like, hey, how are you doing? She's like, great. And she wasn't rude. She wasn't disrespectful. She just said, great. And I still didn't remember where I knew her from. And I said, how was your summer? And she goes, it was great. Let me tell you about the highlight. And I went out on a date with this guy. He said he'd call, and he never called. I was like, oh, shit. Now I knew where I knew her from. And, I have a very deep faith in God, and I think God always gives us these shift moments, these opportunities to find truth in different stories. But you got to be looking for them. You gotta be paying attention. And for 25 years, I was just not paying attention. They were there. I can recall my life now, the first 25 years, and see that there were tons of teachers and people and loved ones that were trying to shift my truth to not to be a victim, but to be a victor in their own life. But I wasn't paying attention. I think people change for one or two reasons, either desperation or inspiration. Either they're so desperate and tired of living the life they're living, and they know they're capable of more, and they're inspired by somebody. And so for the first time in my life, I was aware. And so I'm talking to her that night, and about 11 o'clock, I get up to go to the bathroom. I remember this is 25 years ago. I remember this as if it was yesterday. And I get up to go to the bathroom, and I turned around and looked at her sitting at the table where we had been sitting all night talking. And I realized why the first date was so bad. See, this woman was gorgeous, is gorgeous. She was going to school for 2 different universities. She was going to 2 different universities full time for 2 different degrees. She was going to be a doctor and a lawyer. Same time, 2 different degrees. She didn't party, she didn't drink. She just happened to be in the bar that night with her friends. And she was way out of my league. I didn't know that on a conscious level on that first date, but subconsciously I knew this was just going to be another lost failure. This was too good for me. And so I made a declaration that day that I was going to spend the rest of my life with her and 2 kids.
Not too shabby.
2 kids later, and an amazing life. We're married today. And so that was a shift moment that is a cannonball moment in my life. And a cannonball moment is where you just see things clearly. You see what life is really meant to be, whether it be in a form of contribution, whether it be a form of love, whether it be in a form of pride, where everything just comes into focus. And so when I decided I was going to start my own company 9.5 years ago, I was sitting at the table and I asked my kids, we were like, what's the name of this company? Is it going to be a consulting business? It was really a sales training organization, because that's what I did at the time for my profession. I did sales training. I wasn't motivational. I wasn't inspirational. I was just really good at sales. And my daughters were like, Dad, well, you already know what you got to call it. You got to call it Cannonball Moments. And I was like, oh, can I call it that? And they're like, well, isn't that your life mission? And to this day, that's my life mission, is to try to cultivate these moments really for my wife and my children, my clients. But I believe that it started that way, but I believe that God put me on this earth to contribute to the well-being of every human being that I interact with. And my vehicle to contribute is getting people to get out of their own way and have more of these cannonball moments. Because at the end of your life, that's what you're remembered for, is how many cannonball moments did I cultivate for others, and how many cannonball moments did I cultivate for myself? Call them what you will, but that was my mission.
What role how have you used running as a vehicle? Because you're not a runner, so you're 44. Most people don't start running when they're 44, especially when they, you weren't even like a weekend jogger type of a guy. I don't think.
I had never run in my life. Actually, I was giving a talk in Portugal, and I was doing a talk on mindset, which is, I started as a trails trading company, and then companies started hiring me for more motivational mindset stuff, which I didn't realize. I didn't on purpose become this mindset guy. It just seemed to fold into that way. And so I'm giving this talk in Portugal, and I said, if you have a strong enough belief system, you can legit accomplish anything. I said, I'm 42 years old. I could run a marathon today if I had the right belief system, because your behaviors are predicated off your beliefs. I didn't think of it. It wasn't even part of the talk, really. It was just like a throwaway line. And so I get on the plane and I'm like, could I really do that shit? Could I really run a marathon? And then my ego, 100% ego driven, I was like, oh my gosh, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to run a marathon. You know how cool of a story that would be to tell people I ran a marathon? I literally had no desire to get healthy. I had no desire to get to version 2.0, nothing. I just how cool would it be to walk in on stage with a medal around your neck? It was 100% ego driven. And so I signed up for the New York City Marathon. It just so happened, again, this is God. It just so happened that sitting on the plane going back, I'm researching marathons, and I'm like, oh, I'll run the Boston Marathon. I didn't know anything about marathons. I didn't know you couldn't just sign up for the Boston Marathon. And so I was like, all right, Boston Marathon's out. How about New York City? Well, New York City has a lottery window that you can get in via lottery. But, 120,000 people sign up for lottery, 5,000 get in. But I literally opened the computer, and in that time that I was on the plane, in that couple week period, the lottery window was open. So I'm on the plane flying back from Portugal, and I sign up. I never think about it again, ever. And a couple months later, I get selected. I can't win a scratch off, but I won the opportunity to run a marathon. And so I decided I was going to run the marathon. Again, 100% ego driven. And so I don't train, I don't run. I do one training run. It was the craziest thing. So you mentioned a little bit. I hire a coach, but I really, again, didn't see the value in hiring a running coach. So I really wasn't trying to get better. And the first day I remember, it was a virtual guy, and he said, all right, Chad, I want you to go do a 3-mile run. I just want you to do a 3-mile run. I'd never run ever in my life, maybe when I was a kid or something, but I'm like, listen, I can run more than 3 miles. He said, just 3 miles, nice and slow. I said, listen, I know I'm old, I know I'm tall, but I can do more. I got new shoes, I got a headband, I got AirPods, I'm set to go. I can do more than 3 miles. He said, just run 3 miles. So I'm like, all right, I'll call you back in a couple minutes. I'm such an idiot. So I leave my house, and I live in a cul-de-sac. I come out of the cul-de-sac, and within a quarter of a mile, my lungs are legit on fire. At a half a mile, I'm dying. At a mile, I'm now running, walking. At 3 miles, I'm sitting on the side of the road like a wet chimpanzee, 6'8", soaking wet of sweat, dying on the side of the road. And here's the thing. I was too stupid to run a mile and a half out and a mile and a half back. I had to call my wife, because I'm stuck 3 miles from my house, to come pick me up on the side of the road. But I do it. But I run. But I don't do really much more training. I show up at November 3rd of that year, and I run, walk, puke, scream the New York City Marathon. It took me 6 hours. It was the worst experience of my life. But you couldn't tell me anything because I now had the medal. I wore that thing around my neck like Flavor Flav for like weeks. My wife's like, Chad, you don't have to wear it to church. I'm like, I'm not taking this thing off. This is my medal. 100% ego driven. Well, the challenge is when sometimes you can do the right thing for the wrong reason. I did the right thing for the wrong reason. I ran a marathon, but I ran it for the wrong reason. But from that, my brother and a friend of mine, they were inspired by me running it. So like, oh, we're going to do it next year. And I'm like, oh my God. If they do it, I'm going to have to do it again. And I don't want to do it again. I can't let them have one up on me. Again, 100% ego driven. And so the next year, I run the New York City Marathon. I don't train again. I'm like, I already did it once. I can do it again. Well, it took me 5 hours and 55 minutes. I took 5 minutes off my time. Didn't train, didn't run. Well, they finished in like 4.5 hours. And so when you finish the New York City Marathon, you finish the marathon, and there's about 1.5 mile walk after you get past the finish line to get out of Central Park. It's just runners. Like you have to meet your family. It's 1.5 mile walk. So I cross the finish line, I get the medal, and I have this shift, see how I find truth moment, that I'm not even eating my own dog food. That I'm a fraud. Because I'm telling people to live their life this way, live their life in the pursuit of betterment, live their life trying to live up to this image that you were created to live up to. And I was not that. And so coming out, I made a declaration that I was going to do it again, but I was going all in. I was trying to get to version 2.0. And the challenge in life is people spend more time trying to upgrade their electronics than they do upgrade themselves. And I was stuck on this version 1.0 when God created me to be upgradable throughout my whole life, to be version 2.0, 3.0, 4.0, 5.0. And so I made this declaration I was going to run it again, but I was going to go all in. So I train, I hire a real coach that I'm going to listen to. I train, I change the way I'm diet, I change the way I eat, and I show up the 3rd year in a row to run the marathon. And I ran it in 4 hours and 20 minutes. I crossed the finish line, and it was the least climactic of them all. I didn't care about the medal anymore. I had medals that had no value to them, except for my ego. Now 50 some marathons, a couple ultras, a couple Ironman. Every time I run, every time I do a race, it's to show myself what I'm capable of. And I think that's the idea is we get locked in this mindset that we're not capable of more. And I think the worst type of suffering a human has, worst type of self-suffering, I should say, the human has, is when you know you're capable of more, but you settle for less. If I don't know I'm capable of more, then I'm blissfully unaware. I just think that this victimhood is the best it is for me. But when you taste and you see that you're living well below what you're created to live and capable of living, that creates such a nagging, burning desire in me to reach that plateau. And I've spent the last 10 years trying to reach that plateau. And what's interesting is every time I reach that plateau, it's a false summit. Every time. I get to the top of the mountain and there's just another mountain standing behind it. And I'm like, okay, let's go. And I envision that I'm going to spend the rest of my life on this earth reaching those false summits. The book, I'm saying I'm a guy that never read a book in his life. And now I have a book with my name on it. I don't say that to impress you, but to impress upon you. That for me, this is just another sign that you were created upgradable. You're created for this life of betterment. And so for me, those are the shift moments and running is a big key for me for that to show myself that, I can at any age, keep growing.
Chad, why is it important to fall in love with the process versus the outcome?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Fall in love. It's on every piece of swag we have. It's hanging in my office. If you spend any time with me, I say it about 10,000 times a day. And that's divorce the outcome, fall in love with the process, fall in love with the behaviors. Because we don't dictate the outcome. And when you get fixated on the outcome, you rob yourself of the growth. Now, it doesn't mean outcomes don't matter, but I'll give you an example. I trained for the Tokyo Marathon. This was going to be the run. I went all in. This was probably like marathon number 20. I'm running the world majors. And so this was going to be another world major. And I was going to qualify for Boston at this race. And so, man, I put so much blood, sweat, and tears into this race. And 3 weeks before the race, they cancel it. They cancel it because of COVID. It was the first marathon shut down because of COVID. And I saw all these people so distraught, so like broken because they weren't going to be able to run this race. Now, while I was disappointed, I could look back and say, yeah, I may not have the Tokyo Marathon medal, but I'm a hell of a lot better than I was a year ago. And so you don't always get to choose the outcome. We put ourselves in position to have the outcomes we want, but we don't control the outcome 100% ever on anything, I believe. What we do control are our behaviors. What we do control is our beliefs. What we do control is our mindset. So I'm going to focus on that and let the outcome take care of itself. And if something doesn't work, if I don't get the outcome I want, then I'll go back and I'll deep dive into the behaviors and see, man, what I need to do different, what I need to do better. And so for me, it's always about the process. It's always about the behaviors, and the outcome will take care of itself more than it doesn't, in your favor.
I agree. Kobe Bryant was a master of that, and talks about it, very eloquently, in many interviews.
One of the real quick, Scott. One of the interesting things is on my podcast, I've got to interview some just absolutely ridiculous people, and I was with this guy Matt Frazier a couple weeks ago up at his gym in Vermont, and so I got to spend a couple of days there. And he is the Michael Jordan of CrossFit. He is the best CrossFit champion of all time. And we work out the night before, and then we get up the next morning. We go to dinner, then we wake up the next morning. We do another workout. Then we do an interview. And he was all about process. He was all about behaviors. The outcome just took care of itself. And so the more people I interview on my podcast, the more people that I hear this over and over again, that they focus on the behaviors. They focus on the process, and the outcome will take care of itself if you just focus on the process.
We're doing a collaboration with Jesse with Running Man with the Outlier project, and I think Matt's going to be at Running Man this year. So that'll be.
I'm trying to convince him to do he's never run a marathon, and so I'm trying to convince him to do New York City Marathon with me.
That would be cool.
That's my goal. I'm going to do New York City again this year for the 8th year in a row.
Let's talk about Jesse. So Jesse is a mutual friend of ours. He wrote the foreword to your book.
Yeah.
Tell us about your relationship with Jesse. What have you learned from him? I got asked yesterday on a podcast. I was on Coach Jim Johnson's podcast, and he asked me about mentors, and I'm like, I'm not really sure. Like, I have mentors. I have people I admire. Mm-hmm. And I always bring up Jesse for many reasons. Great husband, great father, just great business person, great friend, etc. Tell us about your relationship with Jesse and how that's helped you and Chad.
But
3.0, 5.0.
Yeah. So what's interesting is, I've had this podcast for 8 or 9 years, whatever the number is. And a couple things about the podcast. In 9 years, I've never once looked at the data from the podcast. I don't know if anybody's listened to it. Like, legit, my mother might not even listen to it. I have no clue. I've never once looked at the downloads. I never once looked at, and my audiovisual guy knows, and he knows he will get fired if he ever tells me, because it doesn't matter. My ego won't be able to handle it. If it's too much or too little, and I don't have that mindset with everything, but with this, I started the podcast because I wanted to surround myself with people's lives that I wanted to emulate, that had something that I wanted to emulate. I studied the best, and I wanted to learn from them more than just their books. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to start a podcast. And I'm going to start a podcast just so I can build a relationship with these people and learn right from them. And it was really hard at first because I didn't realize people just don't say yes when you start a podcast. And so I thought, I just start a podcast. And I say, hey, you want to come on a podcast? but it was a big investment. I spent every podcast I've ever done, except for maybe 4 or 5, I do live in person. And Jesse, I don't know how, I was on I read Jesse's book, Living with SEAL. And so I joined his BYLR group. This is years ago. This is a long time ago. This first or second group. And I showed up to every call. I participated. I asked questions. I offered commentary. I offered my thoughts. And so we had this parasocial relationship. And a parasocial relationship is a relationship you have with somebody that you've never met, but you believe it's a real relationship, even though you've never met them. It's all through the internet. And your mind believes, and this is a very real thing, like your BFFs, like your best friends. This is what parasocial relationships are. And so I had this parasocial relationship. So if somebody said, hey, do you know Jesse? I'd be like, oh man, we're barbecue buddies. I had never met him face to face, but I felt like I knew him. I felt like I was boys with him. And so about 6 months into this parasocial relationship, I DM him and I said, hey, I'd love to have you on my podcast. And he's like, okay. He said, when do you want to set up? I said, well, when are you available? I'll come to you. And he's like, you're going to come to me? I said, yeah, I'll bring my video guy. We'll set it up. So he goes, and you know Jesse, he goes like, okay, well, come to my house in Atlanta. So I go to his house in Atlanta a couple weeks later. And his house in Atlanta is beautiful house in Atlanta, but he has his office down in the basement. Then they have a space, and then they have Sarah's office, and they're both glass. You can see across from each other. And so I walk into his office, and he's there. We're talking, and we do the podcast interview. And he goes, oh, let's go get something to eat. So I spend the whole day there. So we walk across this like hallway from his office, and Sarah's in her office having a Spanx board meeting. And we walk literally right through the office while she's having the board meeting. He introduces me to the entire board. We start talking to them. And I'm like, where the hell am I? Like, I'm hanging out. Like, what kind of what universe is this? And that just tells you who he is. And what captivated me about him was just that you go to his house and he's just a normal guy. He's just a normal guy. At 3:00 that day, he said, Chad, hey, I'll be back in 30 minutes. Just hang out. And I said, okay, what do you got to do? He said, I got to go pick up my kids from school. So he's like leaving to go pick up his kids from school. Then his kids come back. And so that made me want to hang out, like to learn from him, because family is so important to me. How does this guy build billion-dollar companies? How is he married to one of the most successful women in the world? But yet still have pictures on his refrigerator of him and his family and his kids. And that's what I wanted. I wanted betterment in all areas. And so, from what I've learned from him was this idea that you don't have to have this, what they call the tyranny of the or. You can have everything you want as long as you're willing to believe that you're worthy of it and willing to do the work. And so we built this incredible relationship. And when I wrote the book, I called him and I said, hey, any chance you could write the foreword for my book? And his answer back was, yeah, when do you need it? There was no like hemming and hawing. There was nothing. And so from that, I've learned a lot of things. But even to this day, every podcast interview I've done, yourself included, I have their cell phone numbers. I have contacts. I can literally reach out to them because I've invested in these relationships that have helped me become the person I am today. And that's the power of surrounding yourself with just amazing people. And believing, the key part about that for me is believing that you're worthy of sitting at those tables.
Yep.
I think most people don't walk into the room because they don't believe they're actually worthy of sitting at the tables. And I believe, my faith tells me that there is no table in which you do not belong. And so for me, that's been a big key. Walk into the room like God sent you there, because he did. And so that's been a big part in my relationship with Jesse, but also my relationship with Matt. I was in San Diego on Saturday or Sunday this week, and I was interviewing John Asseroff. And if you don't know who John Asseroff is, this guy is just. And I'm sitting at his house. I'm literally sitting on his deck at his house with probably, if not the best neuroscientist in the world. The guy is just absolutely, it might have been one of my favorite podcast interviews I've ever done. Just sitting there, listening and learning from this person. Now I have a cell phone number. He's like, oh, we should collaborate together. And I'm like, this is surreal. But you know, ego stands for edging God out. It's not about God, it's about me. Believing that you're worthy of those type of tables, I think, is the key to the things we want in life. But most people don't believe they're actually worthy. And that was me. I didn't believe I was worthy. And you don't get what you want in this world, you get what you believe you're worthy of. And now I've changed it to believe I'm worthy of more.
I have two more quick questions for you, and then we're going to open it up for everybody. So if you've got a question, get in line. You say that great stories have high stakes, and our word of the year is audacious.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, I think for me, high stakes is it has a ton of meaning, and it's something that it stretches into that what we call eustress zone, something that challenges you to change who you are to become what you want to become. And most people, I think the quality of your life. This is probably one of the biggest fundamental beliefs I have, and that is the quality of your life is predicated on the questions you ask yourself. You ask yourself shitty questions, you'll have a pretty shitty life. You ask yourself amazing questions, you'll have a pretty amazing life. And I was cultivating so many negative, horrible questions as a kid. And now I ask myself really, really hard questions. And I think the question most people ask themselves, I think we get it wrong, my opinion. I think most people say, what do I want to accomplish? And I think that's the wrong. I want to write a book. I want to lose 50 pounds. I want to save $1 million. I think that's the wrong question. I think the question we should be asking ourselves is, who do I want to become? And so the stakes are, who do I want to become? But I'm trying to become husband 2.0, because let me tell you, if I stay the same husband I am today, if I'm the same husband I was 25 years ago that I am today, I'd be obsolete in my marriage. Because my marriage is different. I'm different. My wife is different. I can't stay the same father I was 25 years ago to 20 years ago to 20-year-old kids, because I'll become obsolete. So the stakes are, I want to become this next version of myself. And so first question is, who do I want to become? Second question is, what does that look like? What does that look like? What does that version of you look like? Well, it looks like a more patient, more present father. It looks like it's a more fiscally responsible business owner. It looks like it's a more present friend, whatever. And then what do I need to do to achieve it? And I think that for me, the high stakes are not achieving things. One of the reasons I do things like write a book or run the ultras or do things like that is because it's in pursuit of becoming that next version of myself. It's just a milestone on the way. And if you spend your life becoming, you'll achieve more than you could ever possibly imagine. But if you only focus on achieving, then the challenge is this. And this is where I struggle with a lot of people that say, well, you should have this achievement, this big audacious achievement. I want to write a book. Okay. Well, do you know the feeling of writing a book or running a marathon? That feeling, that joy you feel, will dissipate really fast. And then I got to achieve something else. And I'm chasing this feeling of achievement rather than the pride, the intrinsic pride I feel from constantly becoming. And so for me, I'm captivated by the feeling of becoming, not the short-term effect of achieving.
So last one for me, because I love this thought, the difference between being a motivator versus a facilitator.
Yeah. So I think motivation means to push. And all too often, I had people trying to motivate me for years to write a different story. We see the life that we've created, but we don't see ourselves as the author. Gabrielle Bernstein said that. We see our life that we've created, but we don't see ourselves as the author. And I think for a lot of times when we try to motivate people, what we're trying to do is rewrite their story for them. Well, there's nobody in the world I love more than my wife and kids. Nobody. But I can't rewrite their story for them. That's not my place. I don't have the ability to do that, because people tried to rewrite my story. But when you have a story of victimhood, your negative story of victimhood will always be more powerful than somebody else's story about your victorhood. And so when we try to motivate people, what we're trying to do is we're trying to rewrite, in my opinion, we're trying to rewrite the story, as opposed to, I'm not going to motivate, I'm going to facilitate. I'm going to facilitate you telling yourself better stories. I'm going to ask you great questions. I'm going to get you to question the stories you're telling yourself. I'm basically going to lay the pen at your feet and say, rewrite a better story. And I think so often we're trying to tell people what to think as opposed to getting them to trip over the truth that the minute you decide to write a better story in your life, the minute the world will tilt in your favor. It happens. If it can happen for me, I've only been inside a college classroom once in my entire life. And it was last year when I delivered a keynote address to the entire business school at the University of Alabama. Like, what? Like, what? To me, that's just absurd. But the idea that I decided to write a story where I could be the lead actor of my own movie, where I could actually be in front of the classroom and deliver value, to me is something only I could do. Nobody could do it for me. And so I want to facilitate my kids. I want to facilitate my employees. I want to facilitate my clients. I want to facilitate my neighbors to question the stories they're telling themselves and then ask them, is that story serving you at your very highest level? And if it's not, maybe it's time to start rewriting and then let them rewrite their story.
So good. So good. All right. We got a bunch of questions. Chad, you ready?
I'm ready.
Ready.
I'm a Capricorn. I like long walks on the beach. I'm saying those are the type of
January 10th. You're January 12th.
January 12th. Right? Romantic comedies. Yes, I am a what is that? I was going to say when Harry Met Sally, but that's not it. I'm a big romantic comedy guy. Notting Hill. That's just my favorite movie of all time. Notting Hill. I'll admit it.
Notting Hill. Duly noted. Alex Smith in Florida. You are up with Chad Sanschagrin.
I logged on. I saw Alex Smith, and I was like, oh, shit. This shit's legit now. Because Alex Smith is one of those badasses that everybody needs in their life. Everybody needs an Alex Smith. I was like, oh, I didn't know he was going to be on. I would have dressed better.
Now you're making me blush, Chad. I'm also a Capricorn, a fellow Marylander. I'm not from Baltimore. I don't hear the Baltimore, but outside. And I've been in BYLR and love following your ride the last few years and got into marathons. I just want to also thank you for taking a call with me like years ago. Just you put out in the community, like anybody who wants to call just to talk, and I was going through some stuff. And so thank you.
My pleasure.
I have the big thing I wrote down you said was just like the act of becoming and like knowing these moments that don't pass you by. And I'm kind of struggling with, like, I have a podcast. I never look at numbers either, but I struggle with, like, is it going to grow or not? And I'm like, oh, maybe I've always thought about writing a book, or I've actually sat down and thought about what, or wrote out chapters. I feel like maybe it's, I procrastinate, and I'm curious, like, before you started writing it, what was that like little moment of you becoming that, like, kind of started the avalanche? Because I just feel like it's sometimes that one thing, like you meeting your wife, you were out of desperation. I like the desperation versus inspiration. And I don't want to be in desperation ever. I want to always operate out of inspiration. So, but I'm still procrastinating with it. So I'm curious for you what it was. Because
for me, I had this conversation with somebody yesterday where, the minute you have this, what I think is called an epiphany. An epiphany is this, for me, it's not this outside influence that's trying to get your attention. It's the inside great you, the version of you that you were born to be great, that the greatness that's inside of you peering out. Because we put on this mask, we put on this cloak to keep us safe. And I think when you say, hey, I want to write a book, I want to start a podcast, I think it's this like this snapshot of really what you're meant to do, meant to be in this world. But the challenge is the minute you think great, you wake up the critic. The minute you think big, the minute you think audacious, the critic wakes up. You go, man, how am I going to do that? Nobody's going to listen to it. What if it fails? What if it's this? And it stops you in your tracks. It stops you dead, and you believe what the critic says because it's going to keep you comfortable. And so, for me, you look for those signs. And I think the minute you have this, for me, the minute I have a thought of something audacious, I have a bias towards action. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be great. I don't even have to know what I'm doing, but I'm going to take a bias towards action because the action is what shuts the critic up, at least for me. But understand that when you're filled with these questions of, is anybody going to listen? Why would somebody? Do I have anything to produce? I knew I wanted to write a book for a long time. I didn't know if anybody would read it. I had no clue. but I wanted to write a book for a long time. But the critic convinced me that I had nothing to contribute and that my story wasn't one worth being told. And so I just put it on the back burner. I procrastinate and I'd say, oh, one day. And I was driving, I was doing a talk in Chicago. And I landed at O'Hare Airport probably about, and I talk about this in the book, but I landed at O'Hare Airport probably like 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. And I order an Uber, and I'm going like an hour and a half outside Chicago. And so I go outside and I call the Uber, and the Uber comes right away. And we get in the car, and it's the most surreal Uber ride I've ever had. The Uber driver's talking about mindset and beliefs and this and that. And it's just, he didn't know anything about me. He didn't know what I did. I didn't tell him what I did. We're just having this conversation. When we get to the hotel, and I get out of the car, and I go up to the hotel. It's like a Courtyard Marriott or something. The front doors are locked. It's like now like 2:30 in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning. And the front doors are locked. And there's a button that says ring the button, the attendant will let you in or something. And so I'm waiting for the button. He gets back in his car and And right before he gets in his car, he goes, hey, Chad, maybe it's time for you to write that book. And leaves. We never mentioned a book. We never, that was God. And it was a sign. It was a sign that I needed to say, it's okay. And so I think the challenge is the critic is going to stop you from taking a bias towards action. And all the reasons that you have are going to feel like legit reasons because they are. But your reasons become justifications. And then your justifications become excuses. And those excuses become your truth. And you don't even see them as excuses. I got a million of them. I have a whole closet full of excuses of why I shouldn't do the things I do. But my belief that I was meant to shine in this life overpowers all of them. And I think that, you start by telling yourself, it doesn't matter how many people will read your book. It doesn't matter how many people will listen to your podcast. I'm gonna divorce the outcome. I'm gonna fall in love with the behaviors of contribution and just have a bias towards action. Especially you, Alex, who is one of the most good-hearted, amazing human beings that radiate love and abundance. I think that you don't need permission to shine. That's what you might be looking for.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Sandy Gogurt in Seattle. You're up, brother.
Thanks, Scott. Hey, Chad.
Hey, Sandy.
So you may or may not remember this, but we met at the Joe Dispenza event in Santa Barbara with Meltzer.
I do. I knew you looked familiar. I couldn't remember where I met you from, but yeah, that was what a great event. I'm at a private dinner with 40 people sitting on a panel with Joe Dispenza. What is happening to my life? Yes, what a great night. What a great event that was.
That was a great event. And one of my big takeaways from that night was I had just finished dunking on my 50th birthday, which was my goal to dunk until I was 50.
Yeah.
And you and I started talking and you were telling me about your marathons and how you started doing it for the process, not the ego.
Yeah.
And it just hit me that I had been dunking until I was 50 for the ego. And I've now carried that forward. Wow. And I swear this year will be my best. Wow. But it's not awesome. For the ego, it's for the process. So, yeah, I love that. I've taken up a lot of endurance stuff that I thought that I hated and all that. But my question for you, after thanking you for the inspiration, was how do you balance this idea of surrender? You talk about God and the universe and knowing that oftentimes there's a much bigger path for us than we can conceive ourselves.
Yeah.
And balancing that idea between surrendering to that plan that is obviously bigger than what we can for ourselves and that need that we have to always take action.
Yeah. Well, what a great question. Yeah, for me, I didn't understand the power of surrendering my outcomes to God and my life to God. I didn't really understand it, even though I grew up in a Catholic house for most of my life. But when, there's a great book called Anxious for Nothing by Max, I forget the name. It'll come back to me. I apologize. But basically what they're saying is, you're creating this anxiety, even though every day of your life has been planned out before you've were born, before you were even conceived. And I think at the end of the day, I will surrender to God. I will surrender my life to God, but I also have this culture of divine discontent. Divine discontent. And divine discontent means that I know in my heart of hearts that Jesus believed, that God believed that you were spending your entire life on this earth dedicated to self-transformation. And when you transform yourself, you can help others transform. And when everybody transforms, the world becomes a better place. And so I think the idea for me is it's because true ego, like I said, edging God out, it's not about God, it's about me. Real ego would be not believing that you should have a bias towards action. You weren't created to just take up space. You were created to contribute. You were created to grow. You were created to become. And so for me, if you have a true faith in God, for me, if I have a true faith in God, then that means living with my foot on the gas pedal. It means being grateful for what I have today, but being obsessed with the next version of me is going to do. If you walk down my hallway in my office, there's 3 pictures. There's a picture of me as a kid in my little league outfit, miserable and broken. And underneath of it says who I was. Then there's you walk a couple feet further and there's another picture, and it's a picture of me crossing a finish line in a marathon. Full smile, cannonball moment, arms up, and it says who I am. And then you walk a couple feet further and there's another picture of me, of my shadow in an early morning run. And it said who I'm becoming. My life forever changed the minute I decided to love all versions of them, to love every version of them, the broken one, the current one, and the future one. And all of this happened because I have a bias towards action, because that's what God created me. I don't get to rip out, I can't rip out my childhood. I can't rip out that chapter of my life and have the same ending. God put me through that. Without that, I'm not sitting here today. Without that, I don't write the book. And so he tests us. I'm tested every day. And for, like you said, a bigger purpose that I'm unaware of. But I know one thing. I better take action. I better take action every day I'm here.
Yeah, thank you. What's coming up for me as you say that is this quote that I heard probably a year ago about, if you work on your career, you'll have a pretty good career. Work on yourself and you'll have an amazing life. And so if the action is towards yourself and betterment, the rest can take care of itself. I could not agree. I believe this. I believe there's 2 types of virtues in the world. There's career virtues and there's eulogy virtues. Career virtues are what they'll say about your retirement party. Eulogy virtues are what they'll say at your funeral. I live my life for eulogy virtues. The career will take care of itself, but I'm looking for a lot bigger virtues in the world, and that is my eulogy virtues, that I served a purpose while living on this earth. Great, thank you.
Yeah.
So good. Lindsay down in Boston.
Hey, Chad. Hey, everybody. This has been absolutely fantastic. I've resonated with so much of what you said. You hit on something earlier about asking questions and asking the right questions. And I've run exactly 1 marathon. I have no desire to run another. I've written a couple of books and I did a podcast. And I love that I've constantly made myself uncomfortable. But what are the right questions that folks should be asking themselves? Because you kind of touched on it, but I could see everybody's gears were turning. Like we need a little more. So
perfect. So I'll tell you what. First, I'll start with 4 questions never to ask yourself. And that is any question that begins with the word why, ever. See, why is the judgment question. Doesn't matter. When you ask somebody else or you ask yourself a why question, it's always, your brain is going to automatically think you're being judged on that answer. I say to my kids, why didn't you do your homework? I'm going to get a defensive answer. Why didn't I make a better decision? Why did I do that? Well, it always puts me into that ditch. What we want to ask ourselves is calibrated questions, and those are what and how questions. So if anybody that knows me knows that I'm constantly asking myself what and how questions. What does this look like? How do I do this? And whenever I'm struggling in life, I literally just write questions. I don't look for solutions ever. I only look for the questions. What is this supposed to mean? What did that mean? What makes me believe this? How would I be different if this? And so I literally will fill up legal pads full of questions. And these are what's called calibrated questions. And so for me, you'll catch yourself asking a ton of why questions. And when you ask yourself why questions, they'll put you in this victim state. And for me, the why is important. I love what Simon Sinek says is get to the why. You got to know the why. I'm all for that. But using why to get there will never get you there. Using those calibrated what and how questions are the questions that put you in the creative side, the solution side, the growth side. And so for me, it's always about the what and how and never about the why. And if you ask yourself great questions, what does this mean? How do I achieve this? What does this next version of me look like? Like all those questions, your brain starts to get into this creative space. And we were born a creation and we were born to create. And so for me, don't ask yourself why questions, only ask yourself the what and how.
Amazing. Thank you.
So Chad, now that you've created an incredible company, you have a beautiful family, you've written a bestseller. What is Chad Sanschagrin 11.0?
Yeah. I think for me, you know, I talk about gratitude a lot, and one of the challenges that you run into, because not everything is roses and sunshine, one of the challenges that you run into is when you have this mindset of divine discontent, or this belief system that I have that I need to keep upgrading. Sometimes it takes you out of the present. And I'll give you a great example. So we did pre-sales for this book. My publisher calls me and said, Chad, pre-sales are going really well, and there's a possibility that you could make the best-selling list. Now, I had expectations, and you know, William Shakespeare says, expectations are at the root of all heartache. That's what he says. Expectations are the root of all heartache. Every time you're upset, every time you're frustrated, every time things don't go well, it's because an expectation wasn't met. And so I had expectations that the book was going to do well, that I was going to, that I had served the purpose of creating this book and that it was going to resonate. Well, he says, Chad, it's an opportunity. There's a possibility you might make the USA Today bestselling list. And so it just so happens that when the book was published, the week that we'd find out, the day that we'd find out was a Christmas morning. The list comes out on Wednesdays. Christmas was on a Wednesday. We're going to find out. And so 6 o'clock in the morning, I wake up, I walk outside my bedroom door, and my wife is jumping up and down, tears strolling down her face. But she's jumping up and down very quietly because she doesn't want to wake my daughters up, right? So I'm still half asleep. I don't know if she's having a stroke. I don't know if something's happening. Like I'm like in a fog of what's happening, but she is bawling, jumping up and down. And she says, you did it. You made the list. Your book is the number 2 book on the USA Today bestsellers list. And in that moment, if I'm being honest, I don't know if I'm happy or I'm relieved, because I had set such high expectations for what this book was going to do and how it was going to turn out. And I don't know if in that moment I robbed myself of my own happiness just to be happy for a moment. And I think for me, version 11.0, version 12.0 is to allow myself just a moment to feel not maybe happy, but really proud of myself and what I've done and what I've accomplished and who I've become. It won't stop me from becoming that next version. But I think sometimes, even with everything I just told you over the last hour, sometimes we get so worried about contributing and growing and becoming that we stop and appreciate even the cannonball moments like that was for me. And I think for version 11.0 is to still keep my foot on the grass, still grow my company. I have great events. I'm speaking at the Masters coming up in a couple of weeks, which is unbelievable to me as a golf fan. I have great things planned, but it's to maybe appreciate a little bit more and have a little bit more pride in the things that I have accomplished and the things I have become, then get busy to work again. So right now it's about being in the present.
Chad, that was a phenomenal hour. Thank you so much, guys. Buy the book, leave an Amazon review. Chad, what else? So we're a community now of about 750 members in 35 countries. What can we do to be a resource to you?
Well, first of all, I can't, the biggest ask you can ask of anybody is influence. And the fact that everybody on this call would allow me to pour into them and speak to them for an hour of their time, which is their most valuable commodity, is beyond humbling. And I really do appreciate everybody getting on the call and listening to me. And the circle that you've created, Scott, is beyond extraordinary. Everybody knows who the Outlier Project is. Everybody knows who Scott MacGregor is. And so for me, it's just what you can do for me is continue to allow me to be in your circle. I'll earn being in your circle every day. And if I don't, then kick me out of your circle. But allow me to continue being part of your life. And thank you for being part of mine. I really do appreciate it. And if you get the book and you find value in it, I'd love for you to tell me about it. If you don't find value in it, I'd love for you to tell me about it. And we'll see what's on the horizon for me next. But full of gratitude. Thank you very much.
Chad, you're the best, my friend. Really, really spectacular. I appreciate it. All this time, I thought you just liked me because I knew how to pronounce your last name.
You are one of the only people that can pronounce my last name.
I say Sanschagrin as much as I possibly can because I'm crushing it.
What's crazy is my victim mindset was so bad that for years I thought my last name was going to be my biggest detriment. And then probably like 10 years ago when I started my company, somebody was like, you know what your last name means, don't you? I was like, no. And they're like, sans, without, and chagrin, regret. Your name literally means without regret, without remorse. I was like, oh, okay. Maybe God knew what he was doing after all. Yeah. Maybe I should embrace it. So, yeah. Awesome. Thank you very much, everybody.
All right,
I really
go
do
kill the
appreciate it.